Hi guys, I'm Matthew and I'm very excited to introduce you to a new series I'm starting called Exploring the Soundtrack. In this series I'll be using each episode to take an in-depth look at a musical soundtrack I've connected with over the years, exploring what makes the music unique, how the piece is arranged, why the track helps to elevate the scene, and where you can implement the techniques that are present in these tracks into your own tracks. I've been a long-time fan of music from games such as Darkest Dungeon and Skyrim, films like Lord of the Rings and the Batman trilogy, and TV series like Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones. With all that said, I hope you enjoy this video, which will be focusing on some of the tracks from the iconic game Pillars of Eternity Deadfire. The game's soundtrack was created by Justin Bell, and it straddles the somewhat unusual theme of high fantasy and pirates. So without further ado, let's explore the soundtrack. Track 1, Deadfire. Booting up Pillars of Eternity Deadfire, you're immediately greeted with this title track. A crescendo of percussion opens up into a soaring string section, reaching a climax after a few bars and then dropping down into a much more melodic passage. This more soothing and melodic section plays over the main menu screen and evolves from just a viola and a couple of violins into some elements of the brass section. With the general tone of the song set with this movement between strings and horns, a melody is established that repeats a few times throughout the track. The standout part of the track for me is this melody. The beginning of the phrase poses a question and the following phrase answers it, and this continues a few times until finally the overall paragraph is resolved with this epic sounding string section. For me, this passage as a whole establishes the narrative that although in this game there are going to be questions and the story is going to be mysterious in some aspects, the ending will be worth reaching and it'll be epic, just like the music. Track 2, Prologue. Something that immediately interested me about this song is the use of percussion to assist the narrative. Being a game that features pirates, it's inevitable that some form of ship-to-ship combat takes place, and to me, the subtle echoing of drums in the background of this song emulates the idea of cannon fire. Another thing that strikes me when listening to this song is that it has a much more remorseful tone than the previous. The repeating melody throughout the track, played on violin, sends off in a much more sad way than it comes in. The violins are accompanied by a suppressed brass section, and later on some elements of the woodwind section. It's more specifically a clarinet or perhaps an oboe in its lower register. What the brass section does is very interesting to me because it departs tonally from what was done in Deadfire and comes in on a much more subtle and toned down note. Finally, one clever tool present in this song that you may choose to use in your own compositions is sending off and coming in on the same note. Specifically, this track starts with a lone violin and the echoing of drums in the background, and it also ends in the same way. This serves to create a theme of repetition or continuity surrounding the track, and this can be used in the media to push some sort of narrative. In this instance, the context of the media is that this song plays during the recap of the prequel. Giving a sense of continuity to these scenes informs the listener that if they've played the last game, this game will be similar, and helps them to understand that their new story picks up where the old adventure left off. Track 3, Character Creation. Designed for the game's character creation menu and level up menu, this song doesn't provide the listener with any unnecessary drama or sense of turmoil. Rather, this song serves to create an overall sense of rising upwards. The track achieves this by starting out with a fairly subtle tone and fleshing out into a bolder tone through the use of more instruments. However, my main takeaway from this song is the idea of repeating a melody or harmony and maintaining the listener's interest through the use of clever arrangement. To elaborate, the first section of the song only utilises string instruments that are on a lower register. The following portion of the song introduces the higher pitched instrument in the string family, the violin, and also teases us with a quiet melody on the flute as we go into the woodwind section. Yet again, this woodwind-centric penultimate part of the song teases us with a subtle suggestion of brass as we head into the final section. Bearing in mind the fact that we have 3 minutes and 45 seconds of music based off one melody and chord progression, it is an accomplishment that this track doesn't come across as stale or uninteresting, thanks to Justin Bell's clever use of instrumentation. Track 4, All Gods. All Gods is a peculiar track. It's one of the most popular in the soundtrack, and initially when I listened to it, this confused me. The song on a whole feels tumultuous and messy, and I couldn't put a finger on whether it was intentional or non-intentional. But after looking at the context for this song, I took a complete 180, because in this instance, the song is elevated by the media, whereas most of the time, the media is elevated by the song. For reference, this song plays at a point where the player's character has died and has entered some form of underworld or afterlife. The song is also present when the player witnesses the gods' arguments, debates, and agreements. The pantheon of gods in the Pillars of Eternity for the most part struggle to agree with each other. However, through the input of the player, they occasionally find compromise. I believe that this is what the track represents. The collection of the gods' voices represented by the string section that were in the process of arguing or discussing something. As the melodies pass by each other and occasionally intertwine, causing dissonance in the tune, they eventually come to a musical agreement in the last section of the song. A louder, more resounding melody is played in the lower register of the cello, and the track is completely absent of any other instrumentation. In my opinion, this is intended to symbolise the gods coming to an agreement in the game itself. I would highly recommend trying to achieve this level of narrative structure in your own tracks. Although it may be tricky if you are not composing for an already existing media, my suggestion would be to choose a story or narrative that you are passionate about and compose something around that, secretly. Track 5, Farmer and the Fox. The song Farmer and the Fox is a departure from the majority of the soundtrack. A much stronger reverb is used in this occasion to make the player feel like they are in an enclosed space, which of course they are because this is the music that plays during the game's taverns and inns. The music is designed to represent a tavern house band in a medieval fantasy setting. You hear a flute, a small range of percussion, a stringed instrument of some kind that could very much be a lute or a baroque guitar, and interestingly a hurdy-gurdy, which was a period instrument that was used in small performances of the time. Instrumentation aside, the song has a very off-pitch and off-tempo feel. I believe that this is an intentional decision by Justin Bell to make the listener feel like they are listening to amateur musicians, people who are just appearing in a tavern playing their instruments. This is interesting because it's the first example of diegetic music that we see in the soundtrack. Diegetic music being music that characters are hearing. It means that the music is within the scene. This is a clever composing trick that you can employ yourselves. If you compose for actual musicians in a piece of media, you can nuance the music according to the people. An extreme example might be that the violinist in a band only has 2 fingers. In that occasion, the composition that you're making couldn't have more than 2 notes at the same time on the violin. Or maybe one of the musicians is slightly deaf, and you could have them playing slightly out of syncopation with the rest of the band. Little interesting nuances like this can add a lot of character to music, and people really dig into it when they get attached to those characters. Track 6, Closed to Board. Similar to Prologue, this track focuses on ship-to-ship combat, except this time it's not happening in the distance, we're actually in the fight for this music. Interestingly, this song uses the main melody and chord progression from the song Farmer and the Fox, and it also uses a lot of the same instruments, but simply puts both of those things in a different setting and arrangement. The hurdy-gurdy is a lot more present in this track and really tries to push the atmosphere of sailors and sailors playing music. The percussion in this is noteworthy because it is a lot more lively and definitely represents the feeling of action and incitement. A tip for composing fight music or combat music is simply to use more percussion than you would usually. Bonus points if you can sync any percussion to a punch or a kick that may be happening in the media. That's all I've got for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, hit the like button, and if you want to see more content like this, consider subscribing.